Professor McGregor, I think I speak on behalf of others when I say we are very, very privileged to have you this evening. This means a lot to all of us. So I turn over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kabadaki. It's always a great pleasure to address one of one's former students as doctor. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the honour that you and the association have given me in inviting me to come. It's always a little difficult to follow a paean of praise like that, but I once heard it done extremely well by Archbishop Donald Cobb, the Archbishop of York, who laid the foundation stone of the Budo Chapel. And he was once given a very glowing introduction, and when it was finished, he turned to the chairman and said, "Mr. Chairman, while you have been speaking, I have been offering up 2 silent prayers for forgiveness. The first one was for you, for telling so many generous untruths about me. The second one was for me, for enjoying them so much." Well, I had prepared a kind of lecture about the history of Budo, but I'm not going to give that, because I didn't realise I would be speaking before you enjoy your dinner, and there are limits to the human patience of even old Budonians. And I'm glad I didn't. I decided not to use that, because I've listened today to a fascinating discussion, good-humoured, good-tempered, hard-hitting, brilliant members, and what I want to do is to select from my knowledge of the history of Budo some of the things that seem to me either to have been left out today or worth underlining in today's discussion. So I hope you'll bear with me. You have all, or those of you who are old Budonians, which is the large majority of the audience, you all chose to come to Budo having a pretty good idea of what Budo was and what it stood for. I have to confess that I did no such thing. I knew nothing at all about Budo when I applied to teach here. I didn't even know that Entebbe was the airport for Uganda and that I would land at it. I was teaching at a school for blind boys in England and enjoying it very much. And my wife and I had only recently married, and we were just expecting our first baby. But I realised that most of my colleagues at this very specialist school had been there a very long time and never done any other kind of teaching. And particularly because blind children get most of their experience vicariously through their teachers and friends and the radio and television and so on, as well as from Braille literature. I thought it would be interesting to do something different and then come back. And I really expected to come back to the teaching of the blind within about 3 or 4 years. So I applied first of all to what was ominously titled the Native Education Scheme for Southern Rhodesia. I got rather a frosty reply which said, yes, I think we'd probably be willing to accept you, subject to medical examination and so on. If you came, you would have to teach for 6 months, and after that we would be willing to pay half the fares for your wife and baby to come and join you, provided you had acquired accommodation of which we approved. Well, you didn't have to be a genius at reading between the lines to understand that those terms suggested that the government of Southern Rhodesia was not really taking its native education very seriously. So I dropped that particular set of particulars in the waste paper basket, and the next week's edition of the Times Educational Supplement happened to carry an advertisement for Budo. I applied for it. I got it, but only because there were 2 posts. 3 of us applied. I went home that evening and said to my wife, well, we can forget about that one because the other 2 chaps have already had African experience. I'm referring to Victor Gilbert, who came from Ghana, and Douglas Hare, who came from Nigeria. But the interviewing panel advised the headmaster that since they thought they had 3 good candidates, it ought to take all 3. And so that was the lucky reason why I came to teach at Budo. I enjoyed it immediately and enormously, and was very struck by the quality of the students. Karen was one of my best. She was a member of a brilliant first year. And I was also struck by many of my colleagues. I was a particularly lucky young man, I think, to join a school that had just had the best service from Senteza Kajubi and Erisa Kirondi, And after having them as colleagues for just a term, they both moved on to McGregor, where I was lucky later on to join them. They were extremely clever men, and I've often said since to people who have wondered how one could teach in Africa for such a long time as 12 years, and had I not encountered a great deal of racism. And I was able to say to them honestly, I encountered virtually no racism at all in Uganda. And that if people had the privilege of teaching with and under people of other races who were so much cleverer than they themselves that it really rather hurt. There's a certain kind of racism that when that's happened to you, you can't any longer be guilty of. And that was one of the many blessings that Uganda bestowed upon me very quickly. Ian Robinson was a fine headmaster, and as I think I may have mentioned to a few of you yesterday, and I probably won't repeat again, I owe to Ian Robinson the fact that I wrote the first history of Budo, the first 60 years. When I was appointed to Makerere, my wife and I were going to take Ian and Joe Robinson out for a meal, and we called at their house, and Ian, very unusually, wasn't punctual. He was in fact in the bath. And he shouted out from the bathroom, there's a book on the table that might interest you. And he took quite a long time to complete his ablutions and change into his suit. And I'm a reasonably quick reader, so by the time he arrived and offered us a glass of sherry, I had read about half of the history of Achimota College. Now it struck me, Ian said, what do you think? And I said, well, it's an interesting book, but after all, Achimota was founded as an absolute showpiece. The colonial government lavished a huge sum of money and everything that the school wanted. And I said, after my 4 years here at Budo, I've learned a bit about Budo's struggles, and I think somebody could write a much more interesting history of this place. Now, Robinson was a master delegator, so his immediate response was, good, well, why don't you do it then? And when I went on to Makerere, I in fact did write that history of Budo as my Master of Education thesis, and it was a fascinating challenge. I just want to single out some of, for me, the highlights of that history, and tell you in all honesty that the second half, which I completed last week, the African leadership of King's College Budo, is an even more exciting story, and a wholly, I think, admirable one. The courage and bravery and resource and initiative that your African headmasters have shown is, I hope you will agree when you read the book, quite astonishing. But first of all, something that surprised me in today's discussions, many tributes were paid in an oblique fashion to Sabaganzi Weatherhead, who was a remarkable headmaster. But you know, the real founder of Budo, as Sabaganzi reminded us, and I quoted him in the first 60 years, was a Muganda, Sarapolo Kaggwa, the Katikuru. Weatherhead, you see, had the idea, the CMS were prepared to support it, and he knew that if it was to be a healthy site, it needed to be on a hill. You know the reasons as well as I do. And he visited some 20 hills in Uganda and began to grow impatient because he couldn't find a suitable one that was available. And then somebody told him about Budo, but they didn't tell him much about the great history of Budo, as the coronation hill of the Kabakas. So he came to see it and he thought, this is magnificent. This is where we want to build our school. And he went back to see Sarapolo Kaggwa and said, well, what I want is Budo. And Kaggwa said, that's impossible. That cannot be done. And so Weatherhead claimed in his very interesting letter that he wrote many, many years later, that he practiced a good old game of British bluff and said to Apollo Kaggwa, with whom he was a great friend, well, if I can't have Budo, we shan't have a school. And to be very brief, Kaggwa then took on the whole Buganda establishment, who were horrified at the idea of anything being built on Budo Hill, and he won. And Weatherhead said, it is to the courage and enthusiasm of Sarapolo Kaggwa that we owe Budo. Nobody else could have pulled it off, and he is the true founder. Weatherhead did several other interesting things, and one of the Budo ghosts that I would like to lay completely and finally to rest tonight is the notion that Budo was founded for the sons of chiefs or for the children of the elite. There is an episode in Weatherhead's time, which those of you who've read the first 60 years might remember, where he insisted that not only the cleaning and the washing and some of the gardening had to be done by the boys, but they also were going to have to do some digging if the school was going to have a swimming pool. Now, we had an interesting insight today from one of our alumni about digging and how he persuaded Timothy Cobb that the one thing he certainly wasn't going to do as a Munyankore was to dig. And he got away with it. But I tell you this, he wouldn't have got away with it with Weatherhead, because a young prince came to Budo in 1906 from Ankole, and he looked around and he said, yes, I would love to come, but there is one thing that worries me. And Weatherhead wrote, I knew what was coming. It was the digging. He said, I cannot dig, you see, this would destroy my Kajubi. So he went away, because Weatherhead said to him, well, if you come here, you must dig. And this is the key sentence: there is no distinction here between a prince and a peasant. Now, those were the words of your founding head teacher. So it is nonsense, and I hope you will rebut it wherever you meet it, that Budo was founded originally only for the prestigious. The happy ending to the story is that the young man went away, and he came back 10 days later and said, I want to come to your school, I will dig. And he not only did, but he was apparently responsible, almost single-handed, for digging the foundations of the first porter's lodge at the entrance to Budo. Well, Sabaganzi was obviously a great leader, and he was followed by his brother, who led Budo through the war, and then Weatherhead Jr. was succeeded by Canon Grace. Canon Grace truly was, I think, a remarkable head. I've had the privilege now of knowing personally the last 6 headmasters of Budo, but if I had the option of meeting one of the others, who's now gone on to his rest and reward, it would be Canon Grace. He got off to a very remarkable start in Uganda as an educator, because he became headmaster of Mengo High School. And it was that school, which of course was merged with King's College Budo in 1927, that did start, originally intended as a school for the sons of chiefs. That was written into its first prospectus. That mustn't be confused with the early establishment of Budo, which was quite different. Well, Grace was quite determined that Mengo High School was to have a scout troop. Now remember the time, it was just after the Great War, and many of the Baganda, who have always been one jump ahead of the sheriff, as they say in America, they thought, hello, now this is the scout movement that was founded by General Baden-Powell, and he was the man who relieved Mafeking during the Boer War. This is just a crafty movement to make sure that when Britain gets involved in its next war, our sons are going to have to go to serve in it. So they said to Grace, and they explained why, no scout troop. Grace said to them, no scout troop, no school. And I'm going back to my house, and I will stay there until I am trusted. I think this is an important anecdote, because I believe that trust has been one of the foundations of the success of Budo. Well, Canon Grace stayed in his house, ladies and gentlemen, for 3 weeks. And eventually, one of the governors came to him and said, we understand that you feel very strongly about this, and we believe that you must be telling us the truth, and therefore we will have a scout troop. And Grace came out of his house and went back into his office, and Mengo High School continued. But Grace's great gift to Budo, I believe, and one of the things on which I expected to write an entirely separate chapter of the history, was co-education. Grace came off to America and saw 1 or 2 co-ed Negro schools, as they were called, and he heard that Achimota was thinking about co-education, and he decided to take the plunge. Now, that was an extremely adventurous thing to do in Uganda in 1931-32. And as Rhoda Kalema has written so well in her little booklet about successful Budo women, a tremendous amount is owed to the parents of those first 6, I think it was, girls. They trusted Budo, they trusted Budo boys, and It might not have been wise, but it did. And the whole thing began with this selected group, and it grew very slowly. But it's to Grace's foresight and to Mrs. Grace's care for them that the success of those first girl students was due. Now that was a tremendously adventurous thing to do. Remember, at that time, there was only one co-educational boarding school in Britain, which had had schools that you and I would recognise as schools for 1,200 years. But the first co-ed boarding school in Britain started in 1917, I think, and Budo followed soon after. That was a terrific tribute to the foresight of Grace and of the Baganda and the leaders of other tribes too, of course, who were prepared to support it. So I think Grace must go down in Budo history as a remarkable head, and I believe that if you have to put your finger on one contribution in 100 years of Budo that is the outstanding one, I say, and this is not an attempt to flatter the ladies, but my money goes on co-education. It's been a great achievement. And I'll tell you a very remarkable thing. On all my last 5 visits to Makerere and Budo over the last 7 years, I have tried to talk to people about co-education. And on my last visit in 2004, I was able to meet with several groups of prominent Budonians, male and female, and I deliberately tried to needle them into being in some way critical of co-education. And it is honestly true that I have not been able to get a single criticism out of any of the hundreds of old Budonians that I've interviewed formally and informally. That too is an extraordinary tribute to its success, and I also think to the determination of our Budo young women. Well, Grace was well succeeded by Canon Gastor, who stayed only 5 years, Gastor by Lord Hemingford, as he became, Dennis Herbert, who was a good headmaster, who acquired the ridiculous reputation of being able to recognise every Budo pupil from behind. Now I mention that because I myself have been leader of several educational institutions, and honestly there is an awful lot of nonsense talk about how many people the leader really knows. You don't, even if you're a genius at remembering people, and I presided over colleges of 1,000 and then of 4,500 students, you cannot possibly know. What you try to do is to behave to everybody as if you knew them well and as if you cared for them, which you do. And when you are going to have to meet them or interview them, you make jolly sure you get the file out of the cabinet and look them up and find out a little bit about them, so that when you begin to talk about them, they feel known and therefore they feel loved. You might say that's a bit of a confidence trick, but I think it's a very important one, which most, I think, in fact all Budo heads have been good at, but you don't half have to work at it. And I know that George works at it very hard, and I hope that when he is eventually succeeded, our 13th headmaster or headmistress perhaps of Budo will recognise that as extraordinarily important. I worked under Ian Robinson, who was a splendid head and who survived through considerable difficulties. But I want to go on now to what I believe are genuinely the most extraordinary Budo years. You perhaps don't know, though you will when you read the book, that Budo had 3 successive head teachers who really didn't want the job at all. Robinson was the first. He's been my close personal friend now for 46 years, and he still remembers very vividly Leslie Brown, the bishop, saying, "We haven't been able to find a candidate that we think is right for Budo. We want you to think about doing it." And Robinson said, but I don't want to move. I love it at Willie. I don't particularly want to be a head. I really don't want to do it. And Leslie Brown said, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to accept that. I'd like you to think about it for a week and then come back and see me. And the story to be told very shortly is that Robinson, after a week, thought, if Leslie Brown thinks I am the right person for that job, I don't think I am, but perhaps he's right and I'm wrong. Well, I think that was a good decision. But he was a very reluctant head. Daniel Kyanda was even more reluctant, as many of you will know. Some of you, no doubt, were present at the famous, in fact, I think, unique occasion when President Obote, whatever we might think of him now, and in the aftermath of the revelations of his second regime particularly, President Obote took a most extraordinary decision at the Budo Prize, at the Budo Founders Day and Speech Day of 1969, to publicly plead with Ian Robinson not to leave, but to stay for another year, because within another year they felt they had a chance of finding an African head. That was a very brave thing for Obote to do. Here was Uganda busy Africanizing, and yet he was saying, here is a Muzungu, and I want to tell you, we can't do without him, not for the next 12 months. Robinson, very reluctantly, but clearly, agreed to stay. And the reason why Obote had made that request was because the governors knew that Dan Kyanda, who didn't want to come much either, had said, well, I would be willing to come in 18 months' time, but I cannot give up my evangelical work for students in Kenya and Ethiopia at very short notice. One of the things I want to say about Budo, which will strike you as rather sharp, I expect, is this. I think it's got to grow out of the very bad habit of criticising all its head teachers for their first few years, simply because they are not their predecessors. I think there have only been 2 head teachers who've escaped that. Weatherhead's brother was one, and that was because he was Weatherhead's brother, and he'd already worked in the school for 6 years, and everybody knew him, and they thought, well, he'll be all right. And the other, who I shall mention in a moment, was, I think, Eliezer Bawuuba, my splendid former pupil. And he was very acceptable because actually he was the person that the governors wanted to appoint 4 years earlier, when they had to make a different appointment. But otherwise, I think it's true to say that Cobb, who was a fine head, and I should have referred to him before Robinson, Cobb was often criticised because he wasn't Herbert. Robinson was criticised a lot because he wasn't Cobb. Dan Kyanda was most unfairly criticised because he wasn't Robinson, and so we go on. Timothy Cobb, I think, is probably the funniest, the most amusing head teacher Budo's ever had, and I'll just give you 2 or 3 examples of his humour. At the end of his first week, he decided that as there usually was an entertainment on the Saturday, but nobody seemed to have done anything about it, he'd better do something about it. So his logbook entry reads something like this. Understood that there was always a Saturday evening entertainment, summoned a meeting at 12 o'clock to begin at 2 o'clock of staff and students who were interested. Only Mr. Katana turned up at 2 o'clock, 4 other people arrived by 1:15, and we had arranged an entertainment by 3 o'clock. And the evening entry says, the entertainment seems to please the performers, I'm not sure that it pleased the audience, and the headmaster was hit by bird droppings from the roof as usual. On one later occasion, after a speech day, a boy came up to Cobb, and Cobb was immensely amused as a teacher of English because the boy said to him, "Sir, your speech was surprisingly interesting." No? Okay, I let it pass. When you say to someone, your speech was surprisingly interesting, you are implying that your speech is usually very boring. Well, Cobb made a big impact on Budo, so did Robinson, so did Kyanda. And Kyanda did it, I think, largely by defending democratic procedures. I wish I had longer to talk, because I'd like to develop that theme very strongly. Not much has been said today about Budo's Christian Foundation, and I don't want to say a great deal about it, but I want to say 2 things. First of all, I believe that Christianity is fundamentally about the way we treat each other. And I believe that democracy, in tiny ways in families, and in much bigger ways in large countries and perhaps in large universities, is one excellent way of expressing that love and respect for other people. I don't want to talk about the Christian witness, because I don't think we should. I think we should act it out and hope that people will notice. And actually I believe that that's what Budo has done through most of its time. Dan Kyanda had a very rough time at Budo. He was very badly criticised. He was not trusted for being absent. And I happen to know that the reason why he was absent from the Hill for a good deal of time was because he knew that time spent at the Ministry of Education, which was very harassed in the first 2 years of Dan's headship, and even worse once Amin came to power, time spent there was time well spent. And he used his judgment about often needing to spend whole days in Kampala when the rest of his colleagues, of course, were teaching. Well, he was very unfairly criticised for that, and I would plead with everybody present to pass on to their offspring. Be careful when you criticise your head teacher that you actually know what you're talking about. Dan certainly preserved and fostered democracy. On one occasion, a prefect came to see him very angry and said, "Sir, I have had a terrible meal in the mess tonight," an experience that will be common to all of you at some time. And Dan's logbook entry reads, "The headmaster sympathised and made him an omelette." Well, I thought that was pretty good. Dan was succeeded in a most extraordinary way by, I think, Budo's least known headmaster, and I hope when you read my account of his headship, you will agree with me that he did a remarkable service, in his own words, in keeping the Budo train on the rails. This was Ishmael Uyirwoth, and Uyirwoth was required to be headmaster of Budo. He didn't want the job either. But after 4.5 years, Dan Kyanda felt free to go back to his evangelical work, and he was a pretty sick man anyway. The job had taken a tremendous toll of him. So Uyirwoth one day, the governors said they wanted Eliezer Bawuuba. Well, Eliezer Bawuuba by then had the gumption to move into administration, and he'd actually moved to Nairobi. He wasn't available. They then said, well, if they couldn't have Bawuuba, they wanted Bawuuba. And the ministry said, we can't have Bawuuba because we've just made him headmaster of Kampala High School, as it's now called, the Aga Khan School. So the Budo Governors very unwisely, and to any governors here, I commend that this action be never repeated. They did nothing for about 6 weeks. And the ministry then said, right, if the Budo Governor's not going to do anything, we'll do something. And they summoned into the office of the Chief Education Officer the Chief Inspector for Geography, Ishmael Uyirwoth. And they said to him, Budo has no headmaster, we want you to be headmaster of Budo. And he's a very amusing chap, Uyirwoth, and he said, I thought very quickly, because he'd no idea why he'd been asked to come to the office. And he said, sir, there are 3 reasons why I should not go to Budo. First, I am not an old Budonian. Second, I am not a Muganda, he was from West Nile. And third, I am very happy in my job in the inspectorate. So they told him to go off to the conference he was just about to go to in Nairobi, and they would think about it. And a fortnight later he came back, and there was a message on his desk saying, see Chief Education Officer immediately. And as he walked up the stairs to the Chief Education Officer's office, Daniel Kyanda was walking down the stairs, and he said, congratulations. And Uyirwoth said, on what? And Dan said, you're the next headmaster of Budo. And he was told it was a Tuesday, you are headmaster of Budo, and you start on Thursday. Now, this was really preposterous behaviour. But even worse, or even better in some ways, occurred on the following Sunday, because Uyirwoth realised that there was a crisis. There was no chapel preacher. The chapel committee had thought it had booked a bishop, and he was double booked. He was preaching in Namirembe Cathedral. So there was a little crisis meeting outside the chapel, and Uyirwoth told me, he said, I thought, well, I might as well take the plunge. It's a good chance. And he said to them, look, if you would like your headmaster to give a short address, I would be quite willing to do so. And the group looked at him in almost thunderstruck amazement, and they said, but sir, we assumed you were a Muslim. Ishmael Uyirwoth. But above all, of course, he'd been appointed under Amin's regime, and they assumed that Amin had personally, which he hadn't, intervened to appoint a Muslim. So Uyirwoth got off to an extraordinarily difficult start, but he was a man of great courage, and he, as your fine historian Abdul Kasozi, to whom I owe a great debt, because I've used his wonderful book, The Social Origins of Violence in Uganda, as providing most of the background to what was happening to the country while Budo was trying to keep alive from 1971 to 1986. But the story of Uyirwoth's skillful defence is one very well worth reading. He got very little credit for it. One of Timothy Cobb's other jokes was that Uganda was an interesting country because the Ugandans were very generous and warm in welcoming you, and they were equally warm and generous in saying goodbye to you. It was the period in between that was apt to be difficult. Well, poor old Uyirwoth, as I said, got no welcome at all. 10 of the 16 staff had never even heard of him, and the other 6 didn't know he was coming. But when he left, it was because there had been several death threats against him, which he ignored, but which the ministry was not prepared to risk. And he was not dismissed, but asked to return by a message taken up by a motorcyclist up the hill late in 1979, when he was just getting ready for what he hoped would be a good term after the expulsion of Amin and the success of the Tanzanian army. And the letter said, hand over to John and Paggy in the next 24 hours. Well, to his great credit, Uyirwoth said he couldn't do that. It was just not long enough. He needed 10 days. And during those 10 days, he wrote a masterly summing up report of his time at Budo. And he coined a phrase which I think is a very good one for our next 100 years. And I've taken the liberty of using it as the heading to the chapter I've just finished writing about George Semakula's 5 years. He said this. He said, I think there is no future for Budo until Budo staff can learn to behave themselves, because he'd had to put up with a great deal of indiscipline and drunkenness by staff. And I think there is also no future for Budo unless it can get out of its regressive and negative conservatism and have a considered policy of progressive conservatism. Now that means, yes, conserving the best of your past, but also being willing to change. Uyirwoth was a fine head. He was succeeded by Eliezer Bawuuba, who, those of you who knew him, was a very small man, but a very brave and determined man, who survived not only the rigors of the period in Uganda that saw the end of Amin and the worst of Obote, but he also survived 2 death threats at gunpoint, in which he was escorted by condos to the bursary and forced to open it. And Christine, his fine wife, who I had the privilege of teaching when she was in S1, she told me that she was astounded at Eliezer's bravery in trying to reason with these people as to why they shouldn't raid the Budo bursary and why there wasn't much point in shooting him. But on the second occasion, because he'd taken precautions, they found virtually no money in the bursary, and Christine said for 10 minutes or so I was quite certain that they would shoot him, just out of anger. Well, he survived that, but as many of you will know, sadly he did not survive cancer. And he died still quite a young man, a year after being replaced by your fine, fairly recent head, Sam Busulwa. Sam had a difficult job because he wasn't Eliezer and he wasn't a Mulukli. And I've said something that I hope is not rude, but is firm in the book about Christian divisions in Budo. I think we've got to put them behind us. We've got to make sure that the school is never divided between those who believe themselves to be preordained saved and those who may be, like me, just ordinary run-of-the-mill church attenders who don't have any particular awareness of divine guidance. That's a division that I think we can't afford. Well, I must stop, but I'm going to stop by just suggesting 2 or 3 things for the future, and 2 of them are actually enshrined in my own strangest experience of Budo. Before I come to those, the others, I think we've really got to try to put the finances of Budo on a much more secure basis, and I know that that is the main aim of this evening. And it can be done, but it's a long-term project. And I think we should be very careful of making extravagant comparisons with Harvard and Yale and Oxford colleges and so on. Remember, by my rough calculations, there have only yet been between 7,000 and 8,000 old Budonians. And between 3,000 and 4,000 of those are certainly dead after 100 years. Now, that's not very many compared with the alumni of Harvard, which has between 40 and 50,000 students and has been going for 400 years. So we mustn't make extravagant comparisons, but we can, if we're determined, build an endowment fund. It won't begin to show for about 10 years. But when it does, it will have guaranteed finance for any headmaster to do what George can't do at the moment, and say a project suddenly come up, or a building needs a sudden repair, or there's a sudden opportunity to develop in a new direction, it's going to cost £10,000, we haven't got it. You won't have to say that anymore, and that will be a huge step forward. The other thing that we need to do is to do more to ensure that poor children, or children from poor homes, who win their place at Budo, can afford to take it up. And in case you might suspect that I'm plugging my own book because I shall make a nice tidy profit out of it, I don't make profits out of my books, and the profits, if there are any, and there certainly should be from this one, are going to go straight into a Budo fund to help to pay fees for children whose parents can't afford it. Now, finally, what are the other two things? Well, I had a very strange experience at Budo in July 1961. I was teaching in the lower school block, which had taken over the sixth form, and we were having a splendid discussion on English literature. Actually, it was the work of George Orwell, and I had a very bright group. Quite suddenly, I was rather surprised at a knock on the door, and one of the prefects was standing there, and he said very quietly, "Sir, the headmaster wishes to see you urgently." Now, Robinson was by then quite a close friend, and I knew that there was one thing at Budo that he would not tolerate interruptions for, unless there was a really dire emergency, and that was teaching. So I immediately said to the class, "Can you carry on the discussion on your own?" And I went round to Ian's office. Now, I was at the time master in charge of swimming, and that's one of the sports I still keep up, and I treasure the times I spent swimming at Budo, even though I was attacked by water beetles and all kinds of other insects. But when I got round to Ian's office, I was quite surprised by the nature of the emergency. He said, "I just had a message from Kisozi. It appears there is a body in the swimming pool, and I wonder if you'd go down and see what you could do about it." So I called in at my house and got my swimming trunks and towel, told Jean that I was going down to the pool and might be a little while, and I walked down rather somberly, as you can guess, through the banana groves to Nancy. You'll remember, I'm sure, the beauty of that pool. It's a dirty, scruffy pool, but the setting is magical. I was expecting to find people there. When I got there, there was nobody in sight, and there was just the glorious noise of the birds and the cicadas and the rustle of those huge trees. But at the deep end of the pool, I could just see the top of a grey head. And I went to the far end and I pulled out this poor man as carefully and respectfully as I could, and I found, not to my surprise but to my horror, that he had tied some large stones to his feet with banana fibres, and he had clearly dropped himself in the pool deliberately and had died in just over 6 feet of water. I laid him out on the poolside, and the first thing I thought was, what a superbly built man. What a wonderful swimmer he would have made. I then called out, Woody, and tried to attract some attention, but nobody came. And I could hear the occasional twig snapping in the trees. I'm quite sure I was being watched, and that people would come after I had gone. So I did what I could, and then I walked back slowly up the hill. And I was thinking, as you can guess, I expect, what a tragic thing that I'm going back now to an extremely satisfying, well-paid job, and I'm going back to a group of highly privileged youngsters, and privilege is not an insult. They were privileged, but they'd earned it. And they have excellent prospects and an interesting life, and less than a mile down the hill, there are hundreds of villagers living who are illiterate, who have no money, who have no prospects, and who, at the extreme of life, may, like this man, I didn't then know the reasons why, take their own lives. And I thought, what a dreadful contrast that is, and how aware we must always be as Budonians of our extraordinary privilege. Well, I was walking back through the banana groves, and quite suddenly, one of the sets of fronds parted, and there in front of me stood an enormous Muganda fireman. and he was dressed in the traditional English uniform of a fireman, which had existed since the 19th century, of very heavy boots, a very thick blue serge trousers and jacket buttoned to the neck, and a metal helmet and a truncheon, and the poor man was sweating profusely. And he said to me, "Where is the body?" And I said, "Well, I've taken it out and I've done what I can." And to be honest, it was only his obvious great disappointment of being too late to help that stopped me from laughing out loud at this absurd British colonial anachronism, the fire brigade uniform, that was still being used, not just to send people out to fires in a very hot country, but to send a poor man 12 miles out to take a body out of a swim. So that was the second lesson. Every institution, from fire brigade to Budo, has to change with the times, has to change with the needs of the times. And if we can do that, then I think my translation of our motto, Gakyali Mabaga, may be fulfilled. My translation is this: we've made some progress, but we've still got an awful lot to do, and we can probably do most of it much better. God bless you all in your efforts to do that.
Thank you very much, Professor McGregor. And on behalf of the association and the Budo family and our friends and families, we thank you for the message, which I think is in resonance with the theme of this meeting, which is that we have a century of excellence behind us, but we also have a future of promise. So as we celebrate the past, we are firmly fixated on the future. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of BANA, I would like to invite you to join us for a dinner, after which we'll ask you to take out your checks and join us in some fundraising. It's a buffet. I think Mr. Abdul, I think you'll be calling up table by table, right? Yes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Abdul's staff will be coming to your table to take you out to get served. Thank you very much. And while we're getting served, maybe we can do some more quiz questions. No? Dr. Katende, you have the floor.
Gentlemen, Mr. McGregor talked about Achimota quite lengthy. One person is a very good friend of mine, Dr. Alex Boafo from Ghana, is a graduate of Achimota High School. Alex, please, stand up.
Thank you. So the high table and the headmaster's table, please go and get served. Okay, while we get our dinner, I think I have another victim for my quiz. Mrs. Mrs. Soka, welcome. We have a system here where you get asked a question. If you don't answer it, you're honest to the rest of them, someone making a donation. And the thing is, you should know the answer to this one. In the 1960s, Ugandan schools were full of boys called Agri. They were named after a very prominent person who was Agri. And no, your husband was one of the boys who were named after a Dr. Agri. Who was Dr. Agri? Yes, that's like saying it's from planet Earth. And Mr. Agri Zukusoka will give a donation to rescue Mrs. Zukusoka's honor. Dr. Agri was Vice Principal of Achimota College in Ghana. He visited Uganda very briefly in the 1920s and electrified the Ugandan people by his message of education for progress. Thank you very much. And Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, this is a fundraising event, and we expect generous or small or modest donations. Every cent helps. And even as we eat our dinner, I think we're going to get right into it. And some people, I think, have already indicated that they might be good for some money, and I just want them to confirm. We shall start by welcoming Dr. Muniini Mulera from Canada. Sir, I hear that you are good for a donation to King's College. Could you confirm, sir, and how much are you willing to give, sir?
I have just donated, and the cash should be on your account, the sum of $2,000 US.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Mulera is a classmate of the headmaster, so I guess he felt he could do no less. And I noticed here on a piece of paper that the prefect of South Africa, Dr. Kajubi, has also donated $2,000. Am I right, sir? Thank you, sir. That's right, sir.
Yes, that is true. We shall make that amount available. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kajubi. Gayaza High School is having its centennial this year, and I sent out invitations to the leadership of the Gayaza girls in the United States, and I got a very gracious response from Dr. Florence Zabasajja. Yes, that you will come and join us in this fundraising. Do you have any message for the audience? Her husband will speak on our behalf. Good, Mr. Galyza. Amen. God bless them. Are there any other classmates of the headmaster? Dr. Mkwaya? Your classmate and headmaster's classmate, Dr. Muniini Mulera, has oh my. Dr. and Mrs. Mkwaya, actually, I don't have to ask him, he's already written it down. They have donated to this cause $3,720. Dr. Mkwaya, please welcome, guys. Some people who are not with us have sent checks. Mr. Dan Mbagi of Cincinnati, former head boy of the junior school and prefect of England House, the headmaster's house, has donated $2,000 this very week. Please put your hands together for Dan Mbagi. And another of the headmaster's classmates, Professor James Ndambi of Wisconsin, not able to be with us. He's already donated $500 directly to Budo and has sent $500 to this organization. So Professor Ndambi has already $1,000. I'm sure everybody here already knows that all donors to the Centennial effort will be recognized permanently on a memorial wall at King's College Budo. And if you give $1,000 or more, you get a big plaque, bigger than this paper, and you decide what goes on there. Okay, you can write whatever you want. You can say, you know, I'm giving this donation in honor of the love my wife has given me, or whatever you wish. Haji Kasule, our treasurer, has been busy. Sir, I noticed that you're already down for a donation of $2,000. Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Dr. Kiwumulo Lwanga of Canada, unable to be with us, has sent a donation of $750. Please put your hand together. Kiwumulo Lwanga. Mr. Seruyima, sir, I'm asked by the Budonians and their families to welcome you to this organization. Welcome, sir. You have a message for the school, sir?
Congratulations and good luck to the future Budonians. My grandfather went to Budo, my mother went to Budo, my four uncles went to Budo. I went to St. Henry's.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seruyima. And Mr. Seruyima? Has donated $500. And $500, sir, you get a plaque with your name on it, permanently at the site of the Centennial Memorial, sir. So all you have to do is contact BANA, tell us exactly what you want to be said on the plaque, and we guarantee that it will be done. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm informed by Mr. Muganga that he has been contacted by Mr. Wanda, the president of the Uganda North American Association in New York City, with a donation of $100. Mr. Bashir Kaliisa, $100. And Mr. Karoli Ssemwogerere, $100. Please put your hands together for them. Mr. Eliezer Bawuuba, Canada House, no Canada? No. Nigeria House, and we now know the old name of Canada, has just whispered in my ear that he and his lady wife have donated $2,000. King's College. I think I have my next victim for the wake up quiz. You should know the answer to this one, Mrs. Chisholm, as you sit down. A question. There are 5 buildings at King's College which are memorials, and one is to a king, one is to a prince, 2 are for headmasters, and 1 is a memorial to a Scotsman. Who is the Scotsman memorialized at King's College, Budo, and why? Your husband can't help you. Yes, and she pronounced the Ugandan word Mackay. Yeah, Alexander Mackay was a Scottish engineer who spent only a few years in Uganda, but had a tremendous influence upon the Anglican community. The mess is memorialized after him. So, Mr. Chisholm, your wife got the question right. You do not have to pay a fine. I am informed by Dr. Katende that his buddy, Mr. Stephen Chiwankwamisoke of Uganda, has donated $500 to the Centennial effort. Thank you very much. Buchala Chigongo. Your handwriting is difficult to read, but I noticed that you and your family have donated $2,000 to the effort. Is that true? Thank you very much, Chigongo family. Another of the headmaster's classmates, Dr. Charles Mukasa of New Jersey and Uganda. Are they here? Yes, I see Mrs. Jennifer Mukasa in there, and I see Ben somewhere. Dr. and Mrs. Mukasa have donated $1,000 to the effort. Thank you very much, sir. Do I see some whispering here? Is there something in the offing? Mr. Semambia, on behalf of the Budonians, we are very happy to see you, sir. Welcome. Mr. and Mrs. Chambade, Africa House, Nigeria Clan. I see, sir, that your family has donated $1,000. Thank you very much. The Nsenene clan has yet to be heard from. The Nsenene clan is the clan of Sir Apollo Kaggwa. You have very high standards to live up to. Daniel Mpaji is also of the Nsenene clan. Okay, so he has corrected you even more. Yes, Mr. Mujabi Kajubi.
Nsenene clan.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the children of Professor Samwiri Kajubi. Sir, and your lady wife, your children have donated in your honor $500 to the school, which, as they say, help put them through law school. Thank you very much, sir. Yes. And there's some lovely young ladies here, an engineer and an investment banker, daughters of Haj Badru Kasule. I'm told you have a whisper for me.
I would like to donate $500 to the Budo endowment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jamila. Please stand up and give her guys. Put your hands together for her. Is that together with your sister or is that with your own standing? Prayers, Zayangala. Asumeni Kasule is the older daughter.
I would also like to donate $500.
Thank you very much, engineer. Asumeni is an aerospace engineer. She actually designs jet engines, which just shows you what Budo is capable of. I don't see any hands raised. Oh my. I see a young gentleman here. Could you identify yourself, sir?
Eric Katende.
Eric Katende of the Rugave clan, is son of Dr. and Mrs. Katende. And what's your message, sir?
Trevor, Alan, and me pledge $1,000 in honor of our dead, Dr. Roscoe Semakula Katende. We are so thankful for his patience, generosity, positivity, warmth, brilliance, diligence, and of course, love. As we grow older, we can only hope to do so. We can only hope to do some justice to the Katende surname that he has made synonymously with dignity and respect. Happy birthday, Dad. We love you.
Well, Dr. Katende, sir, please stand up and be recognized. The Katende boys have donated $1,000 in honor of their father. And no father is more worth such an honor than Dr. Katende. His efforts towards this evening have been superhuman, mainly because he has been constantly encouraged and basically threatened by a lady who I would name that you better get it done or else. Yes, your name is
Alan Katende. Katende family pledges $500 in memory of our late uncle, Dr. Seruyima Katende. Ghana House, may his soul rest in peace.
Thank you very much, sir. So the boys have raised $1,000 in honor of their father and $500 in memory of their late uncle. Thank you very much. My uncle is summoning me. It looks like I'm going to get an enkoko. Yes, sir.
Babasaga is donating $100 towards a scholarship to get Soga Kid from anywhere in Busulwa to go to school. starts tonight. And that's the way it is. And you can show a kid next week to go to Budo. And give $100 from there. The kid can go to school. Let me know what we need to do.
Thank you very much, sir. The headmaster has taken note. A scholarship fund for the boys and girls of Busulwa has been set up and will be funded by Mr. Leonard Zabasajja. I would like to recognize Mr. and Mrs. Nandigove, who have donated, sir. Mr. Nandigove, what, $500? Mrs. Nandigove, $500. $1,000 from our young couple. Thank you very much. Are you giving notes, Manjikasule? Mr. Headmaster, should we speed up or are you satisfied with the speed so far? I think Dr. Katende has another whisper. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Your name, sir? Dr. Alex Bawuuba. The name is an Ashanti name, and sir, you have given us a check for $500. Thank you very much, sir. He's going to say a few words to us.
Ladies and gentlemen, I feel really honored to be here tonight. Dr. Katende is a very good colleague of mine. We both work in the same hospital, and I've had several encounters with him. Tonight, a few references I've made of Achimota School, and I feel really excited about that. There are a lot of parallels between Budo and Achimota, and being an old Achimota myself, such a great honor to be here tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bawuuba. Anybody else? I think it's time for the next victim in you.